Yep, we're ready to go. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, October 17th, 2023 to order. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone that wishes to speak for public comments?
I don't see anyone. Thank you.
Okay, we'll dispense with that item. Item 3 is approval of minutes. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, if there is not an objection, we will order them approved. No objection, they are approved. So now, that's a record 2 minutes. We are ready for our staff to unload the next wonderful element that we just, finished our docket, and now you're going to get us working again.
Well, this was on the docket, so we'll probably start it this year and finish it next year. So tonight we're going to start with an overview. You have a draft element in your packet with strike through and underline. But before we get to that, Todd's going to give sort of a presentation and an overview of what this element is all about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Todd Hall, Principal Planner. Tonight will be our first read of the Economic Development Update. And just so you're aware, this is a element that hasn't been probably redone in its entirety in quite a number of years. There's been some economic development strategies and other side work that's been accomplished over the last 6 years or so. And then prior to that, however, the element hasn't been updated since probably the last periodic update. And so you're going to see a lot of major changes in that, and that's going to be reflective of new legislation that's been passed or recommended by Puget Sound Regional Council. And so I'll go into that. So economic development is one of the 14 statewide planning goals under the Growth Management Act. And the Growth Management Act encourages jurisdictions through comprehensive plans and development regulations to promote economic opportunity for all residents, especially for unemployed and disadvantaged people, promote retention and expansion of existing business and recruitment of new businesses, and encourage growth in areas experiencing insufficient economic growth, all within the capacities of the state's natural resources, public services, and public facilities. GMA emphasizes the coordination and consistency across comprehensive plans to support a strong local economy. And I'll mention what that last part means in a little bit. So just to kind of start off here, there's several components that make up the economic development element. That being the introduction, followed by an extensive existing conditions section, the future trends section, and then we also have a goals and policies, which is common among all elements, and then also an implementation strategies section. And I'll briefly go over each of these sections. So to first start off, for the purpose of Kenmore Economic Development Element, it's aiming on 4 topic areas, which are supporting local businesses, stimulating job growth, enhancing the city's tax base, and improving economic well-being of Kenmore. So along with this purpose, the element contains goals, policies, and objectives which serve to leverage Kenmore's competitive advantage and an objective of ensuring economic growth and vitality and a high quality of life. So as the case with the other elements of the comp plan, The economic development element must be consistent with both multi-county and county-wide plans. These being Vision 2050, which is managed by Puget Sound Regional Council, and King County countywide planning policies. Within the introduction section, a new section about Vision 2050 has been included, and this updates the Vision 2040, which was the last iteration of the 30-year plan adopted by PSRC during the last periodic update cycles. One change to note specifically about Kenmore is that the city is now being identified as a high-capacity transit community. So that's a little different than what Puget Sound Regional Council initially called Kenmore as a larger city under the regional geographies designations for all the Puget PSRC communities. And this was a designation that was in effect until 2022, and now the HCT designation is given to Kenmore. And these are cities that and unincorporated areas that are connected to regional high capacity transit systems. And so in our case, because we're on 522, we have a high capacity transit corridor, and that being a future bus rapid transit corridor. We do have SR, I'll pause here for a moment.
They're coming to
It's like
get you, Todd.
the whole battalion is coming through here.
Now, if I may ask a quick question.
Sure.
So all of our, transportation element and all of that stuff that we've been dealing with before tonight, this high capacity transit that you identify here is the same stuff we've been
Yes.
dealing with. No,
Yeah.
no different, right?
No, all these elements are going to talk to one another. They're all consistent with one another. So I'm just mentioning this because that's part of the economic development element component of it is mentioning that one of the advantages that we have is being an HCT community, having access to high capacity transit. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, but I just wanted to note for the record that this change has been made since the last iteration of this plan, which has likely mentioned larger cities and probably the transportation element. So they all speak to one another.
Just briefly, the reason I bring that up is listening to the forum a week ago. A lot of discussion about development, where are densities going, not even talking about the environment issues, but the transit capacity and the walkable city, all of these things. And that's why I wanted to make sure it's a no-brainer question, but I think it just needs to be clear amongst all of us that we're just going on the same page on this and
that's right.
dealing with that.
Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate your patience.
So, and Vision 2050, there's 7 policy objectives which are targeted towards customized local economic policies and strategies. And I won't go over each one of these. They're listed on page 4F2 of the element. And then lastly, King County CPPs, again, countywide planning policies include many policy concepts related to economic development. And similarly, we have to be consistent with theirs, as I mentioned earlier as well. So consistency between our element, the CPPs, and the Vision 2050. And of course, as we were just talking about, all the other elements within our own comp plan. So back in 2018, the city hired community attributes. Some of you may recall this or being involved in it. I obviously wasn't here. But the economic development consulting firm at Community Attributes was hired to update the previous economic development plan from the early 2000s. So this was done when Kenmore was a new community, and Debbie was one of the few folks that was here at that time, being a 25-year veteran. And the goals and strategies and actions were developed to help diversify, grow, and sustain Kenmore's economy. So these items include promote and differentiate Kenmore's image, grow new and existing businesses and target sectors, enable high-quality retail, office, and mixed-use development, leverage placemaking and livability for economic development, expand connectivity access to the waterfront and multimodal transportation, and last but not least, highlight Kenmore's welcoming business climate. So these were adopted in 2018. These still hold true. They're still relatively recent, but we're building upon that in this economic development element. And then as I go on to the next slide here, just very recently, just in this past year, we've developed, or the city executive department created a three-pronged economic development approach. And so these include be a well-run city, seize strategic opportunities, and focus on key partnerships. So under a be a well-run city, this includes promote economic development, be approachable and accessible, and well-maintained and well-planned community. And I might preface this by, these are objectives that we as city staff are focusing on to make sure that we're promoting and ensuring economic development strategies are implemented as we move forward in our efforts. Seize strategic opportunities, be well-positioned and prepared for future, making an impact, and then lastly, engage and support key institutions. So we'll go over these in the element of the review, but in the existing conditions section, this is the bulk of the discussion in the element itself. And there's several topics that make up this existing conditions area. And this is general information, data, tables. You'll see that noted in all of this. There's several population and socioeconomic characteristics. There's some housing, a little bit of housing data. I know we have our own housing element, but because economic development plays a role and they kind of talk to one another, that's also briefly mentioned in here, and we'll kind of delve into that a little bit too. Employment obviously is one going to be discussed. Employment by industry sector, employment capacity, jobs to housing ratio. I'll talk a little bit about that. That's really, how many jobs per housing units that we have within the community. It's not really a surprise that Kenmore is not quite a full bedroom community, but we lean towards that just because of our nature and our history. We're not necessarily the Bothels, the Kirklands, the Shorelines, the Linwoods, but we're not as small as Lake Forest Park. So we're just kind of right in that little niche. Employment growth targets, and then lastly, taxable retail sales. And there's some other little topics in there as well, but those are the bulk of them. I just wanted to point out some of the few key statistics that stood out, and we'll obviously talk a little bit more about these, but as of September 2023, and I get some data from a GIS program that I use with our GIS analyst here with the city, and this is an estimate as of September 2023. Now we just recently get OFM, that's Office of Financial Management, once a year in April comes out with the population, the actual population numbers, and that's going to be slightly less than this, but an estimate is pretty close, as we know, is about 24,448. And so as we know, and we've talked, or you've talked with Debbie about, that 25,000 threshold is the next stage up, especially when we talk about the middle housing discussion. So just wanted you to be aware that we're getting awfully close to that 25,000 mark, and it's not going to be much longer till we hit that with all the activity going on.
So why you brought, that's exactly what was back of my mind. We probably here understand the missing middle issues and all of that. So could you just maybe hit one or two items in the economic development that if we were to cross 25K, that we would be required by law to make any adjustments, or there's a minimum requirement or anything like that?
As far as I'm aware, in this specific element, there isn't anything that triggers us for that. It's really in the housing element which we will be bringing to you at the beginning of 2024. That'll be the one of the major things that we need to accomplish prior to the adoption of the comp plan. But as far as this specific element, there's nothing that number really dictates on what we must do. It's just more of a correlation between, I'm mentioning this because it's just, we talk about population in both land use section, housing, and this element, and they all kind of just speak to one another. So, but to answer your question, Chairman, it's not for this specific element. It would be really what we're going to be talking about in a couple of months with
Thank
no
goodness.
housing. Yeah.
I really, really like that
Okay.
answer.
I follow up on that a little bit. One of the things I think you're rightly pointing out to us is there's a balance between what happens particularly in the housing and what happens in economic development. And one of the things that's in my mind is, given that we are substantially built out as a city and the availability of land that's out there, where choices are going to have to be made that will cross over into coding and in our strategic planning. We're probably going to have to face a trade-off between what we devote to commercial versus what we would devote to residential. And as we reach that 25,000 threshold, we're going to have some new requirements that are going to put pressure on the residential side, which I'm really interested in learning more and talking some more about. How is that going to impact the commercial side, and how do we balance this out? I think there are options out there, but I don't think we're really clear in what I've read in our economic development section on that at this point.
Yeah, I'll probably talk about this a little briefly as we get into the policy section, but and I've shared some of my thoughts with Debbie and also the city manager and deputy city managers, specifically Stephanie, who works with us on economic development. And we're fully aware that Kenmore is in a little bit of different situation than some of our neighboring communities. And actually, this is one of the stats here, I think in one of my slides, if I don't mention it, that about 60% of our businesses here are home-based, based on our business licenses. So that's a significant number, and to try to support them is going to be a big thing. So this may be where we look at potentially flex spaces or loft workspaces, things that they may be more attracted to versus the typical, retail big box stuff that maybe Linwood or our neighbors have. We just don't have the same, market trade area or, all those things that you think about in economic development. We have a little bit of different, makeup here in Kenmore. So we'll want to maybe strategize on how we think ahead with that. So that's something that it's definitely a topic of conversation.
This is Commissioner Cadre. Quick question for you. When we say existing conditions, the data that we have that I'm seeing here appears to be from 2021. The economic development strategy was refreshed in 2018. We have the population data from 2023, but everything else from 2021. Are we going to be updating these numbers when talking about existing conditions, or is this going to stay from 2021? Because I'm sure a lot of since 2021.
Yeah, and I guess that's a question on where we actually want to use. So specifically with the population number 2023, I could scale that back to 2021 and match. I just did that for the purpose of that number, just because we want to be aware of how close we are with that. However, the bulk of the data that I'm able to get is based on 2020 census or 2021 data that came out then. And there really isn't, from PSRC, which is where I get the bulk of the data from, there isn't anything newer than that. And so really that's what we're left with on using for the basis of this element. So if we want to be consistent with that, I'm certainly happy to go back on the population number of 2021 or what have you. It's just that many of these metrics, I don't have the most up-to-date numbers because we get our numbers from the state or the US Census, and they just don't update it that frequently. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
So want to explain to our guests here in the audience that it's not just the big voice in the box, but that's Commissioner Cadre. He has a very low voice. And again, I know that you kind of scared you a little bit. He's scary, actually. And so he's on the virtual Zoom and somewhere in the cloud. But he's he's number 5 tonight.
We're having just a slight technical difficulty where we can't stream him up there, which is why you can't see him. So.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you, Dwight, for that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So a couple more, I'll buzz through these real quick. Educational attainment, about 67% of our population over the age of 25 has an associate degree or higher. The median household income is about 121,000. Housing economic profile, about 9,500 housing units, 67% owned, 29% rented, 4% vacant. And then employment, we got about 4,500 employees that work in Kenmore. 21% of that, which is the largest group, is in educational services. And that's probably no surprise with our schools, with Bastyr, and et cetera. Top 5 employers: Bastyr, the Lodge at St. Edwards, Safeway, Kenmore, Air Harbor, and Inglewood Golf Club, per the Teresa, who's our business license person. And then jobs to housing ratio, again, this I talked a little bit about this earlier. We're about 1 to 2, qualifying us as a bedroom community. Home-based businesses, again, about 60% or more of our Kenmore businesses are home-based, which is impressive. And then retail sales, or taxable retail sales, have grown steadily since 2010, which is not really a surprise. So moving on to future trends. So as I mentioned earlier, we're this new HCT, high capacity transit community. And so we're viewed as an important sub-regional job, service, cultural, and housing center. And we're similar to communities in this category. These would be like Woodinville, or I think Bothell is a little notch higher just because they have a county-wide regional growth center in Canyon Park. I'm trying to think some other jurisdiction, maybe Marysville. Shoreline's a little bit larger, but we're kind of in this, not the small cities, but we're in this medium one, which is what we were before, but we're this high capacity transit. In the downtown area, the newly identified county-wide regional growth center was identified here in the last couple of years. And this will capture a share of the citywide development based on several key characteristics, including we have a prime location between Seattle and the east side. We're obviously located at the top of Lake Washington, and we've got prime real estate right along the lakefront. We're located on a major highway in 522. We've got existing and redevelopable commercial and industrial lands, and then we're the proud home of Bastyr University, and we're very close to UW-Bothell and Cascadia campuses. So one of the new things that's been added to the PSRC list and recommendations is doing what's called a SWOT analysis. I'm sure you've all heard of that. It's strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I've taken a first attempt at developing that, and I'd really appreciate to kind of get your feedback on that. So this is a brand new section of this element. And so some of the strengths, and this is based on some research and some of the data that we already had from community attributes, and I've added that actually to the element so that you could see some of those tables too. But I've noted for strengths, obviously, again, a location at the top of Lake Washington. We've got really pleasant residential neighborhoods. We've got an excellent school district in North Shore. We've got Bastyr and other nearby universities, and we have a very strong local business presence. In terms of weaknesses, and you can see this is as a pro too, but 522 traffic, it's really a barrier to pedestrians and the types of development that we're able to accommodate on that highway. It's obviously, to many, it's a pass-through. We're a pass-through city, and it's a way to get from point A to point B. However, we've, the city has done a lot of analysis and work with previous consultants to see how we can try to capture this, and also how do we break that barrier of 522. Yeah, so also we have competition. This is no surprise, competition with our neighboring cities. So because we're near to some larger cities with more retail there, mainly Bothell, Kirkland, Woodinville, Shoreline, we just don't have the same level or the space, commercial space as those cities have, or we may never have. And so we have to look at other ways on how do we capture economic development or expand on what we do have, the assets that we do have. And then lastly, lack of a large scale commercial office space, which I just kind of talked about. And then opportunities and threats. For opportunities, we're on this excellent transportation connection. Even though 522 is a barrier, it still provides excellent opportunities to get from point A to point B. And it's not a freeway, but it's the next best thing. And we've got great access along that corridor. We've got an expanding downtown corridor. The city's done a great job on just starting that. We've got the hangar, we've got the downtown, town square, and we're expanding that. We've got promotion of Kenmore as a unique lakeside city. And then obviously everybody knows about the potential for a Lake Point development at some point, hopefully, cross your fingers, in the future. And then lastly, threats. Climate change, we all know about climate change. We don't know what the effects will be on Kenmore or not quite yet. I mean, this is a developing science. You heard last night, City Council and previous meetings here with Nina and Richard about the climate action plans that we have in place, but climate change is an obvious threat to not only Kenmore, but all of the region and our planet. Economic uncertainty, we're probably in one right now where we've got inflation and things going up, are very expensive. It kind of fluctuates from time to time. So that's an always threat to kind of consider. Housing affordability is not unknown to anybody. I mean, we don't have to talk about that for too long. And everybody knows that we've got that challenge. This is just statewide, but definitely region-wide, and Kenmore is experiencing this. That has true effects on economic development. Commercial affordability is another one. Many of our businesses that may have been here in the past have chosen to move on and go to other communities that may be cheaper, especially up north or down south, away from the core central areas of Puget Sound. And so this becomes a challenge for any city, including Kenmore in this core central area. And then lastly, transition to online marketplace, the Amazons and all that. This has been occurring over the last 2 decades and will definitely continue to happen. And so we have to look on how do we strategize for that as well. In terms of goals and policies, we'll delve into this a little bit deeper here, but some of them to capture or just mention is establishing an economic base that provides the needs of residents in a range of employment opportunities. We want to strengthen the diversity of job opportunities, ensure that our existing and future housing policies support affordable housing and available jobs, emphasize climate action plan strategies during economic development decision-making. We want to enhance communication and partnerships between the city and local businesses, and then consistency with the city's diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility plan, which was just recently adopted by council, and supporting businesses and projects aligning with those goals. And then the last slide here is about implementation strategies. We want to have incentives to stimulate business revitalization, retention, and creation, cooperative efforts with other agencies to support economic development activities, create opportunities for new startups, support the development of office space or other opportunities for employment, and then seeking grant or other funding opportunities that support business retention, creation, and growth. And that concludes my PowerPoint presentation. So now we can dive deeper into the element itself, unless you have any questions on this presentation.
Go ahead and jump off the diving board. But I would ask that if you are referring to something in the element that you specify the page, also from the clerk perspective, is that we do like line numbers on our drafts. So if in the future, if you could do that, that'd be great.
My apologies.
No,
I forgot about that.
don't worry about it. It's no big deal. It's just easier for us to find
Absolutely.
exactly what you're looking for.
Absolutely. Well, I do have, I provided you a summary of proposed amendments, and I can briefly mention those, or if you have specific areas of the elements that you'd like to cover, or we can go through page by page, whichever the commission prefers.
Chair, can I ask a quick question? Would it benefit to have the element up on the screen? Would that be helpful? Okay,
Well, it'd be helpful for the audience
okay.
in the cloud.
We just need
I-
a second.
I actually have my copy up on my laptop here. A quick question. And looking at the purpose on this page that we're looking at here, it's extremely verbose. I mean, are we going to kind of shorten this a little bit, or is this how it's going to be looking? Because you have the economic development element articulates, and then you have the purpose at the end of this paragraph. So I guess, is this I'm trying to see the difference between what this is trying to say, and I do think this is a little too verbose, and we probably should talk about shortening this a little bit for the purposes of just the comprehensive plan. So I guess that's a question. Is that your intention to keep it like that?
This is a draft, and so this is the first attempt. And so again, if the commission wishes to suggest changes, this is the opportunity to do it.
Suggest changes us?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not quite sure what our process is going to be here. I have a number of questions on the introduction section.
So I
Going to
guess
go through that, or are we just going to
it's
look
up
at?
to the commission how you wish to go through this. We can go through it page by page. We can answer questions and kind of go that way. So it's whatever the will of the commission is.
Okay, why don't we do this? Some of the commissioners have questions, and that would be probably the easier way to whack some of those off the table versus things that will need to be worked on, and versus going page by page. I don't think we're kind of ready for that. We are going to do this, going to have another meeting about this. So Commissioner Vanderleen, you are up first with your questions. A few of them.
So I guess still don't understand what our process is. Are we going to go through this?
No, we're going to go ahead and do commissioner questions so that we kind of get a feel for, because I think that if I'm not mistaken, going through this page by page would take a significant amount of time and may not answer some questions that some commissioners already have. What would you think?
Well, this is the first time that you've had the opportunity to see it. So maybe we could start sort of at a big picture. Is as you've read this, do you see anything that is, that you think is missing? Is there an area that you think needs to be focused on? Do we need more data? So if we can ask some of those general questions before we get into the specifics, might be helpful.
And so that's what we'll do. So since you brought it up,
You're going to punish me for it. Okay.
I am going to punish you.
I get where you're going here. Okay, I will skip over some simpler stuff and maybe just email it to you. One general question you've already referred to, given that a lot of our data is 2020 which is fine. That's the most we've got. But I think one of the things I'd say we need to keep in mind is that's pre-COVID. And particularly when we look at a number of these numbers, for instance, like that 60% of our folks are home-based employment. What does that really mean? Does that include people who are working at Amazon and are now working at home rather than going into an office? Or are those actually independent businesses? It would be interesting to know what that number is. You probably won't have that number because most of that would have occurred after 2020. But I think that's something we need to take into account in our economic plan.
I think I can speak to that just from involvement on the KBA, that the 60% of the businesses registered in Kenmore are home-based. So that's not remote employees for another company. That's literally of the registered licensed businesses based in Kenmore are home-based, not the employees, not the workers.
I think that's an important point to keep in mind, because when we think about how do we encourage that sort of activity, which I think we want, I think that's where the economy is taking it. It's going to be a different set of solutions or a different set of incentives. At the same time, when I look at the section here where we have the median rent and housing values, those look quite low versus what I've seen quoted some other places. But again, it's the 2020 data. But I think we need to keep in mind that these numbers have continued to increase over time. And again, those have an influence on some of the other things we're going to be considering about housing and particularly commercial. Let me scroll down here a little bit more. One of the things I was spending some time on was looking back and forth between some of the data here, for instance, table ED 13, commercial industrial land supply and job capacity. Really interesting number. Basically, this is saying that our existing configuration of our land could support, in theory, 3,881 new jobs, which is very close to what our target is. So to me, that's an interesting message. It says that in order to meet that target, we would have to come close to 100% of what is available out there. So I'm not sure how these numbers were really put together and what they include, and particularly if they include Lake Point. If they include Lake Point, then that number in terms of what's feasible is quite a bit lower. And I've been at this for 20 years, and for 20 years consistently, I've heard, Lake Point is coming. I don't see it getting any closer. It seems to be sitting over there, not pretty much changed. So that's one of the things I think we need to understand is to what extent does Lake Point influence these numbers, and to what extent did that influence the county target number? The other interesting thing about that 3,881 number is you would see that all of this capacity is within the mixed use zone. Mixed use is largely residential. So if we need to use, is this telling us that we need to, if we want to increase our commercial, we're going to have to decrease our residential, or is there some other solution? I think it just speaks to the amount of pressure we're under here, particularly when we look at the targets that have been set for us, which appear to me to be a pretty homogeneous allocation of numbers across the county and conditions that don't necessarily apply to us. So that number concerns me. Again, then it just brings you down to table 14 and the jobs to housing ratio. I'm not sure how meaningful this is given our situation, and what other factors are there out there that could really influence the desirability of this ratio in any city. Again, it's back to this balance. To what extent are we going to be called upon, or do we need to be thinking about in our economic strategy about that balance between commercial, whether that's office or some other type of commercial, and residential? I think we're going to have to make some decisions, and we're going to have some strategy here, which is probably going to have to go back to the citizens to have some input on. So why are, what is the strategic advantage of commercial development versus residential development, and what's the impact on trade-offs on each of those? those are the
Well,
thoughts that
On that
primarily
last-
come to me.
On that last point, if I may, we hear consistent comments from some of our residents that, gee, we just need to do more economic development and develop that land and all of this kind of stuff. And it's just plainly not that simple. And some of our residents think it's that simple. I think what you just went over is well stated. And I think one of the things we, together with the council, I'm sure that they're sort of interested in the same message, need to figure out how to message that so that folks understand that it's a balance, and it's very complex to grow jobs and do density in a small city like ours.
Yeah, I think that's really going to be the crux of this whole thing, particularly when we come down to the implementation stage.
Mhm.
What we talk about there, what we recommend to the city, and what their choices, what type of work would you need to do to be able to get to a decision or get to an understanding from our community about what their preferred choices are. That's work that needs to get done. I'll just move along here. Table 15, taxable retail sales by city. Obviously, again, we are a very small city. So sources for our city revenue and our tax base. The county siphons off most, this is all learnings from the earlier economic development task force I was on, siphons off most of the good out of the property tax. So to a large extent, many cities, or most cities, are really heavily dependent upon sales tax. We have a very small commercial base, so we have a relatively small opportunity to use those taxes, the retail taxes, to supplement our city budget. So one of my questions are, this taxable retail sales, does this include a major source of revenue, which is the law was changed in the last few years, that says that the attribution of retail sales, sales tax, are based upon where the order was placed. So internet sales, web-based sales, if they are generated from a home or business in Kenmore, are taxes that are susceptible or accessible to Kenmore. So how does that play out in these numbers? It's going to be it's also going to be an important consideration when we come back and think about what type of commercial activity would generate that additional revenue.
So along that line, how is the viewpoint of the city administration with regard to our percentage of capturing the sales tax that we should be getting, but it just is, and I'm not talking about that example, I'm talking about things that are being done in our city that is easily taxable, and we should be getting some return on it. Do we have any idea what the percentage of the capture rate is?
And are you still talking about retail sales?
Yeah, it could be retails or B&O or anything along those lines. That is there some thought that there are some businesses for some reason escaping the net in the city or not? You know, we're not talking about, and I'm not talking about the ones that are home-based. That's a whole nother ball game. But sometimes in some cities, there are things and, revenue that's not exactly reported as it should be, or other items that are not being captured by our sales tax.
I'm at a loss, I'm sorry. And in terms of how to address that, because you're asking me are you asking me, are people paying the appropriate taxes?
Right, the businesses, right. Are we capturing all the business revenue in the city? Or some people, does this, go ahead. I think you know what I
Well,
was trying to say.
One of the questions I've been pondering that may be what you're asking about, but I think I may be in another lane here. I've often pondered the businesses on 175th that are exporting wholesale operations. The bulk of our industry is plywood supply and the concrete and asphalt plants, which are not retailing. So there's no sales tax happening there. As far as I understand the invoicing process, that tax would be paid at the point of the drop off where the project is taking place, which is primarily not in Kenmore. That's at some other project somewhere. That's where that tax is being captured. So obviously our two largest industries are those two. And I don't think
So now
I don't know how we capture anything
now
from that.
that is an excellent example. Thank you very much, Derek, of what I'm talking about. That type of example that maybe we should be capturing a little more of that gross sales. I don't know. I'm just asking, that's a question to be asked of your tax folks in the city, I guess.
Well, we can ask the finance director if she has any insight in terms of what taxes the city collects and from whom. I don't know, we wouldn't be able to report specific businesses, I don't
Oh,
think.
no.
But I mean,
Except those are two good ones right there as examples. Now, we don't have to name them, but.
but I still think it's the same question asked in a different way, is what you're asking then is based on how taxes are collected. Are we collecting them from businesses that are in the city, but if they're in a kind of business where it's delivered somewhere, where do the taxes get paid? At the point of origin or at the point of delivery, which is kind of the same internet question or on a
Well,
other kind of business,
It
right?
actually is a little bit different. I think what it gets to is a much larger national taxation issue. Sales taxes are not only regressive, they're also very inefficient. That's why most other modern nations have gone to VAT taxes, value added taxes. That's where you capture that value that was added. And it's not based upon the transaction, it's based upon other calculations to capture that across the entire production and supply chain. And that's a weakness. And it puts, I think, communities like ours at a disadvantage because we are left without that as an option to be able to capture and provide and get a community tax support for the economic activity that happens here that is supported by the city. But that again, might get that at a state issue, but boy, it'd be a very a very aggressive governor who would want to take on the feds on that. So I'll just keep flipping through here. Did you have something else you want to say?
I did want to point out that both of those businesses mentioned do pay the annual Kenmore City licensing fee of $25 a year. So we're all on an equal playing ground there.
Yeah, it's all good.
And there's a B&O, there isn't a B&O tax that they have to pay.
How much of that we get to keep though? Or do we get any of it?
Oh, we get a significant amount of that. That's a big deal. That's like, we get half the REIT. I think we still get half the REIT, right? The REIT, the excise tax on the real estate sales.
Yeah, we get REIT.
Yeah, we get, so there are some things that are kind of anchored into our rights as a city.
Retail demand. The interesting study was published by McKinsey just recently, and they're looking at pre-COVID and up to more recent times. And what they're seeing is that the bricks and mortar share of the retail market previously was at 85%. It's now down to 65 to 70%, and it's projected to go down further below that. That gap is being caused by the growth of e-commerce. Again, as we're thinking about where our opportunities might be for economic development, bricks and mortar doesn't look like, and we don't have to go very far to see what's happening all across the city and all across the country. Every large city or city of, particularly of our size, they're over capacity on all kinds of retail and office space right now. And they're trying to convert it to residential. That's the out they're looking for.
Well, I think we need to sell more tacos and beer. That's obviously.
Sounds like paradise to me.
This is Commissioner Kadri. To that point, so in 2018, there was a consulting firm that was hired to essentially create 6 goals that were established, and economic trends tend to change almost every couple of years or so. Does the city hire these consultants every 9 years? Because the one before that was 2009. I mean, is there a set time period as to when they hire these consulting firms to do these economic analysis based off of the current economic trends that are happening at the time? Like, for example, brick and mortar Rite Aid is filed for bankruptcy or whatnot. Social media has taken over as far as business is concerned. So is there another plan to do another economic analysis anytime soon, or is it just going to be based off the 2018 goals that were established?
There is not a prescribed timeframe. We're not required, we're not mandated to do it. So it's at the city's discretion. You're right, the last one was 2018, but as Todd mentioned, in the last year, the city has kind of taken a more, I guess, refined approach to economic development with that 3-pronged approach. So rather than hiring a consultant, it looked at that past data and decided that for the as economic development is no longer in the council's top 5 or so goals, that there are less resources dedicated to that. So in terms of funding for economic development, now the focus is in what can we do with less resources, which led to that 3-pronged approach.
Understood.
So,
okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
a little bit of background there.
I'll stop. Oh, sorry.
Commissioner Benezinski.
Yeah, just before we move on, I just need to rewind to what we were talking about to make sure that I am staying with you all. In terms of the business and occupation tax, I was under the impression that we do not have one. Is that what you all were saying, or are you saying we do have one? Can we just get clarity on whether Kenmore does or does not have a B&O tax?
Oh, we haven't been.
I just paid one right before I came here. I don't know who it goes to, but I paid one.
Yeah, the state levies that, and then there's a percentage. Now the council they have a minimum and a maximum set that they can go on the B&O tax. Now, I don't know where that is as far as what we're doing. That's for that finance director.
That's a
I guess.
factual question that we can ask.
Yes.
Is, does the city have a local B&O tax? And if we do or don't, or what portion of the other B&O tax does the city collect? I don't know. That's why we have a finance director and I'm a planner.
Well, actually, the Department of Revenue collects it, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And then they divvy it out to us based upon what our rate is.
That's a question that I would like answered, because I do believe that on our city website, we promote the fact that we don't have a B&O tax as one of our business-friendly practices. That doesn't mean the state doesn't have a B&O rate that they're charging, but I think kind of getting at some of your earlier questions, Mike, about like where do we have, who's paying taxes and what kind, and where's room for more resources to be coming in. I think that's really important to be clear on.
That says it on the state, you're correct, on the website, it says that the city does not have a B&O tax, so it may be that it's just state where your money goes.
Most cities get a piece of that. I mean, talk about economic development, there's our bitty little budget, but specifically those like plywood and the cement folks, that would be a big deal.
So this says natural gas tax, electric, phone, cellular, telephone, and then a 5% on cable TV franchise. Those are the ones that are listed on the page.
So why is that's a good policy question, is why are the businesses getting off with not paying some sort of a B&O to the city? Of course, that's not in our area. However, if you want to help fund the element, and there's, again, to my listening to some of the residents of the city, they are concerned about some some economic development and those types of.
Well, and I think if I understand the history correctly, I believe the fact that we do not have a local business and occupation tax is supposed to stimulate economic development. And so I would love to know, is it really stimulating economic development, or is it just kind of a lost source of revenue for our community?
Vote for lost source.
I mean, this is another big part of that trade-off. I think at core of this element, which is, yes, you can levy more taxes. How much do you value? What impact does that have on job creation, equity, diversity of, economic opportunity? All has to be weighed. It has been in the past, and that's where we are right now. Hopefully, the thought was given to that, but I think it's time to
Yeah,
give it some new thought.
yeah, and just to say it out loud too, we levy a lot of taxes on our residents. And how do we want to balance kind of cost sharing between residents and businesses?
Exactly. If you go back to the list that Todd just read to us, those are all consumer taxes.
And then furthermore, to complicate things further, how do we want to balance the kind of like revenue sharing between residents and businesses, but not just businesses as a group, but maybe larger corporate businesses and smaller local businesses? Like what value do we place on having one or the other or both in our community, and how do we want to nurture or support both? I think it's important just to make the distinction between those two kinds of businesses.
Well, if you're under a certain amount of revenue, you pay no B&O. Go ahead.
Yeah, I call out two very large businesses. But at the same time, I do want to represent the other side where, yeah, the city wants to be business friendly, clearly, and that's definitely where we want to position ourselves. I think a B&O tax has a lot more decisiveness for location as to where big box locations end up that are doing extremely high volumes. What is it, a town of 13 population where Costco went, that runs its own tax and its lifelong mayor. I don't think 60%, I could be wrong, but I don't think 60% home-based businesses are deciding whether or not they're going to do business in their own home based on a fragment of B&O tax that's coming off that operation. I don't see that as a huge deterrent. For me, particularly representing my industry, we go where the city is easy to do business with. we're not as concerned about the tax side. We're already getting taxed up and down. We want to go where there's policies and procedures in place that can help us get from point A to open and maintain that. That's, to me, that's a business-friendly city. And so when I read that in here, I understand taxes as a portion of that consideration to being business-friendly. But I really, truly appreciated the city being literally business-friendly, friendly to a new business when I walked in the door. And I think that's where we can capitalize. The word gets out. General contractors know which city is easy to do business with and which one's not. I think every business industry has that reputation, city to city. And I think that's where we focus. I don't personally see from my sector that a B&O tax would be a deterrent from doing business in Kenmore. Clearly it's not, because a new one just opened today. So.
Well, and certainly it doesn't have to be a high B&O tax or anything like that. That's not what I'm suggesting, but you know, one of the public services that we provide is police. We go back to our last element and see what the rate of calls to businesses versus residents are. It would be just interesting because we are paying for that public service for our businesses, and I know you must have, you know, brawls down there at least weekly, but just kidding, of course. But you seriously, there are services and there's roads, and because you're past the point where we're doing development and the requirements for development and sidewalks and all that stuff. And we have to keep and maintain our roads. Oh, I can't wait to hear this one.
We actually got flagged as a strain on those resources at one point because we had too many false alarm calls. So I received a letter that we would no longer be getting responses for non-critical emergency calls. If it was just flat an auto alarm, they wouldn't respond anymore.
This is our police.
It was, yes. It goes in 6-month cycles. So we had to fix that tripping alarm thing. So they do watch their services, their resources, and manage them.
Anyway, I was just commenting on that because there are public services that we provide to our businesses and they're very important.
Okay, so what I'm trying to figure out in here is the questions that we need to ask. Our finance director was just in general about B&O tax, in general about sales tax, how they're collected, and is there any kind of concern about loss of retail sales? Those are the two questions I've got out of this conversation. Have I missed anything?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think that'd be along with, do we have a B&O tax, which I'm fairly certain we don't.
Yeah.
How long, have we ever had a B&O tax? I'm guessing maybe no, but if we haven't ever had one, like what are the economic development trends? I think over time, and has there been any, do we see an increase in economic development with not having a B&O tax? I don't know, it's not going to be causal, but can we see a correlation between those things, or is there seemingly no relationship?
Right. But breweries, that's a whole nother thing. You have some more items?
I'm one just other thought that as we come back to, again, balancing out the commercial versus the residential piece, and the fact that all 100% of our job creating space is in multi-use. One of the decisions we're going to have to think we come back to is, do we need to rethink multi-use, and what does that mean? The traditional multi-use of some sort of retail on the bottom floor, ground floor, and residential above. Doesn't seem to be playing out in other communities. It's just not popular. And with retail dying, if what we're really, and I'm postulating here, I mean, I'm not, we need to have this discussion. If we want to lean more toward office, which the last economic discussion we had in prior years said, yes, that's what we should be doing because it has a lesser impact on many things, including the environment. Do we need to rethink our codings? How does a office-oriented development play out in terms of existing coding? Is it still multi-use? Is there other qualifications or things we need to be thinking about? Does this office, multiple floors of office space, a traditional office space type of thing, which by the way, are a dime a dozen now all over the city. But that's a whole different type of development than multi-use. And that of course influences the potential to push out commercial. Or if you go the other way and say that really what we want to do is we want to have more capacity for residential that would support the existing and maybe a slightly larger commercial base, then do we need to again rethink multi-use and say, nobody seems to be buying or be interested in taking up that ground floor space. Let's talk to developers about how they could use that. And would that be a better use of the limited resources that we have for the city? That's it. I have a few things I'll send you, but they're all editorial sorts of things.
Are there studies that show by geographical area which types of businesses are lacking and that could absorb some business potential?
Well, I know that it should have been something that was addressed in the community attributes plan more so than this, I would imagine, right, Debbie? I mean, that's what that plan dives deeper into versus this element. You know, here we're kind of more, again, a more superficial level, and then we talk about objectives and policies, whereas the plan that they did in 2018 and then the prior one, that is for the consultant to really dive deep, get into the weeds and talk, you know, really find out what is happening, boots on the ground, if you know, to see really what is happening and what isn't, where there's market leakage. You probably heard that term, or, you know, other economic terms that I'm probably thinking of, but I can't think of them right now. But that's where you dive deeper into that versus like this. So not to say that it's not valuable information to provide, but as Debbie said, I think because of the situation where we're at now with the council focusing on objectives differently now than economic development, I think in prior councils, it was last year or the year before, it was much, much higher, but now climate change and housing have risen to the top. And so that's kind of where we're at. We're trying to update as best as we can in this element. We're talking with you all to kind of tailor and finesse some objectives and goals, and knowing that this may be a work in progress as we move along. So we're probably not going to answer every question or know everything in this round. And that's what, you know, we can do here as each year that we progress after the periodic update, we can make some adjustments to that. But I think until we get the next economic development analysis, you know, that's when we're probably going to know.
I think you raise an excellent point here. I may be putting words into your mouth, and I apologize if I do. But I think we're going to need to rely on staff to help us make sure that we have consistency across the different elements. As we've talked about here, this element will impact housing, which will impact transportation. We want to make sure that we don't have conflicting goals, objectives, and strategies across those. as we build on these going forward, I think we need to have somebody that's keeping us honest on those. So I don't think we can keep all of that in our head, keep that broad look.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, this one was, one that I attempted in my first draft here to kind of recalibrate this and working with Debbie and others and pulling data. And so that's a great point, is just really focusing on those goals and policies is probably our biggest task, so that we want to make sure that, okay, are we tailoring these right, but are we also consistent with not only our own elements, but also the CPPs and the PSRC Vision 2050, which I mentioned in the presentation. So.
Well, speaking to that matter, which, I do understand that the council has lowered the issue of economic development. However, I think we've spoken to in our last few presentations how, especially with climate change, is that you have to take, your housing, all these services, and then the businesses and economic development, they have to be kind of balanced out in order to make it all work. And we talked about tonight, as an example, the high capacity transit community. So that by definition is supposed to have some economic elements or development to that. So the council may, for good reasons, want to lower the priority for economic development a bit, but it's going to come back at them, whether they like it or not, because of these mandates coming down from PSRC. But I can see that Debbie's ready to comment on what I just said.
Well, I don't think I think it's kind of where you spend your time and money for economic development. It's not that the city is saying that economic development is not important, it's putting less resources there. There needs to be, as you've pointed out, to have a balanced city, you need to have not only a place to live, but a place to work. And the question then is, what does that balance look like? In terms of high capacity transit, I mean, the city has kind of, and you were involved in that, developing transit-oriented development regulations, kind of laying that framework ready for when the high capacity transit comes through. That's where the density is focused, and that's where some of the associated commercial is also concentrated. So I think it's not the city's ignoring it, that we're trying to be prepared for some of these mandates and setting the table in how the city can, which is essentially through land use regulations and implementation measures. So, whereas in the past, the city has maybe done more, I don't know how to say it, but we had a business incubator, for example, where there was a lot of city resources spent on that aspect of economic development. There was a lot more spent on consultants to come in and do trainings for businesses, just as examples. But I think where the city is focusing now is what really, and Derek has mentioned this, is what often counts for businesses is that if there is a well-run city, and if the businesses want to interact with the city and expand their business, get a permit, start a business, that's what's most helpful for them, is that there is that support there, and that's what the city's role is, rather than going out and recruiting businesses to come in. If you have a well-run city, then the businesses are going to be saying, well, that's good for me. That's a good place to do business. So it's just a question of where the city's resources are spent. It's all economic development. It's just a slightly different, there's taking a different tack right now with economic development.
Yeah, I agree with what Debbie said. I was on the verge of wanting to say something very similar. And also it feels to me like these economic development is a long game. And we like Debbie said, we're setting the table for how we want our community to develop, and always including economically in our comprehensive planning. We're doing it. I think it is important to the city, and just because it's not in the council's like top 5 priorities doesn't mean it's not important. And when Derek talked about what's important to him as a business owner and what makes him want to do business in a city, I heard him, he didn't say it exactly, but I heard him reflecting back the 3 things that the city has decided they'd like to focus on. So I see the floor to Derek.
Commissioner Conry, the big voice, did you want to say something, or do I
Yeah,
just?
Yeah, I need to go through this a little more thoroughly, but I'm looking at this chart about the poverty level. We have a couple charts about, I think it's 77.6% of females live in poverty in Kenmore, 4.6% of males. Is there, again, I'll go through this more carefully, but is there anything in here addressing that? Because obviously higher rate of poverty leads to lower rate of unemployment. And so is there anything in here in this plan that addresses how we can maybe help those that are struggling? And again, maybe it has addressed it, maybe it has a direction, maybe it's a guide from 2018, but is there anything in here that kind of discusses that? Because we have charts, we have graphs about the poverty levels, but I don't see much about how we're assisting, or how the city can assist people that are struggling. I guess that was a question or discussion topic, but and again, it might be in here, it might address it, but it's something that I think is important for an economic development plan.
Yeah, I can certainly, I took note of your comments and I'll see if I include, something tells me that I did include that, and that's a requirement that we do, but I'll double check that we've got something to that effect in the objectives or policies.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Banzinski. Oh. Wyckoff, excuse me.
I just wanted to chime in after what Tracy had mentioned. The other thing that's really important to businesses right now is employees, and the employee factor is based on the affordable housing factor. And my sector particularly is called out in here of a median income of around 31,000, I think, for the food service employees that were in one of the graphs here. I need to be on the 30% AMI to support housing for my employees. And so, I mean, that's also what businesses need. Clearly, Kenmore's not trying to build 100 new restaurants, or attract them, but
Well, good restaurants.
the more dense housing we have that comes with the TOD, the more restaurants we will inevitably be required. And that just, again, loads up the number of affordable units that we need to provide. So that also is something that attracts businesses, is available staffing. The other community I do business in, I am ceasing to do business in, and I am the third one in a month that is announced that we are doing that because of available staffing. And this is becoming a very common problem. So in the interest of business, provide affordable housing for people to live close to work. And if we have that, that's going to attract more employees here, and they're going to prefer to find jobs in their community, which again supports the local businesses. So that's going to be a win-win on both sides.
Okay, Commissioner Banzinski.
Looking through the notes that I made as I was reading this, I feel like there's only one thing that we haven't talked at length about, but it was brought up. But on page F4, F3, under City of Kenmore Economic Development Strategy and Approach, the 6 goals include mention of office, and Mike talked about this, but I wanted to return to it. Because I do feel like, just like we're going to have to be mindful, mindful about trends in retail. I do feel like we're going to have to be mindful about trends in office space as well. News reports indicate that demand for office space hasn't rebounded from the early pandemic, and see like news articles every week about office space being empty. Mark Zuckerberg the other day just broke at least 18 years early. Like, I think those are just trends that we have to be really mindful about when we're thinking about how we want to build our community, what we want to bring into our community. And maybe it's not that we don't want office space, but we might need to be creative about what that looks like. And as somebody earlier mentioned, like maybe loft spaces. I think that was you, Todd. Like loft spaces or shared working spaces.
Yeah, that was something that I was actually talking to Stephanie, the deputy city manager, about. And because of the percentage of home-based businesses, not everybody wants to work at home. They still want to have a space outside of their house. And that may be a loft or flex tech or whatever you want to call it space.
something.
And I know that's was a trend pre-COVID, and it may still be. I don't know the metrics now, but
Oh, there's some.
Yeah,
I get-
so
I
there's-
get
there-
emails about
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
biggest, like is it Regis and a couple of
exactly.
the others.
Yeah, it's like share space,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
and
something like that may be suitable for a community like
Mhm.
Kenmore.
Yeah, and I don't have all the answers, but just thinking about small businesses, our home-based businesses are probably small businesses. And I think the things, Derek, like that you're opening your space up to have those kind of fairs where small businesses come together and sell their wares, like finding, I don't want to take that away from your business, but finding ways to create more spaces for that in our community could serve us really well. And again, I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think that it would be important for us to think about it.
Yeah, I know in the, we don't have the same capacity or land space as Bothell does, but just as an example, because of my former employer, North Shore, where my office was in the Canyon Park area. And as you know, that area is a sea of offices. Well, I know by working with Bothell, some colleagues at City of Bothell, they're looking at completely rezoning that entire area, because that's one example that you have vacancy after vacancy after vacancy, and they're converting it to housing. So that's something we're not going to necessarily experience here, but maybe something to be ultra aware about. That is it, we probably don't want to be completely focusing on even just a small amount of just dedicated office. It may be some flexible, malleable space, right? Because we don't want to end up in that situation. And I know things change over, it's been 3+ decades since all of that was developed in the early 90s. And, economies change, but here in Kenmore, things are a little bit different because of our size, because of the land capacity or availability. So, but that was just one example.
And I think it'll be important to think about how what we're prioritizing fits into our overall vision for our city. If we have a vision for, walkable communities, places where people are getting out and congregating together, like blocks of office space don't really do that. So.
Well, that brings up another question I saw earlier, and I would like to ask. So there was a percentage of vacant buildings or residences, and it was like 7%, 4%, whatever it was. So the question is, of those vacant houses or whatever they are, how many of them are livable and how many of them are really don't mean this completely correct, but condemnable or just not valuable enough that they would have to be destroyed anyway by a new owner because they're not able to be lived in. So do you happen to know that number?
Not off the top of my head, no, I'd have to dig
And
into
then
that.
the other question related to that is where are they? Now, we're not talking about vacant land here. We're talking about structures. That's the way I read that. And vacant land's a whole nother ballgame.
Right.
But it would be interesting to see if by chance there's clumps of these non-habitable,
Non-habitable.
habitate, yes, they cannot be habitable, come on. Inhabitable. You've got to use this, there you go.
They're not habitable.
Thank you. I knew that
Inhabitable.
you could do this. So that's why she's sitting there and says she's, oh, you could probably do it too.
I wouldn't dream of
So anyway, I saw that number there and is that fair to say that number stays somewhat steady or does it have a tendency to go up and down? Debbie's.
I don't know. I mean, there's always going to be a vacancy rate. I doubt whether it's ever going to be 100%. And I don't know if we can get down to the level of detail to determine non-livable, I'll use that word. And especially if there's any data we can get on where that location is. So I just don't know how fine we can chop that
Yeah, that
data.
might- that-
We might not be able to.
Yeah, that
That
may be
might-
difficult.
Sounds like an Eagle Scout project to help the city.
Intern, we'll get the intern out.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we don't have an intern, sorry.
Well, we could fix that. We can put a blinking sign out there, you know. Intern wanted, interns wanted. But now, you know, the thing about interns is you have to pay them. There's no more free interns anymore. At least they're not supposed to be. Well, they'll work
What is
for
that?
beer. That might be the case. That's a good one. Go ahead, Commissioner White.
I had a question, not on this, but in going through the graph or the blip here, table ED-17, the key sector opportunities and challenges. And the top one mentions retail leakage to communities outside of Kenmore. And I'm wondering, is online retail a known factor in this, or is this strictly brick and mortar retail tracking outside of the community? Is it like obtainable retail that we can lure back to Kenmore, or is it forever on the interweb commerce that's adding to this factor?
I don't know.
What page are we on?
This is page 4F-21,
Okay, thank you very much.
top page, ED-17 table.
Okay.
Yeah, this was a cut and paste from the economic development strategy. So maybe there's some language in that talks about this prior to this table.
Okay.
Let's see.
I was just also considering how a golf cart friendly community would help keep that commerce all local.
Well, maybe we should start building, we can test them out on Englewood. And then, no, we're not talking about leakage of beer, right? No, okay, just, if there was, I'd come down and help you out.
You know, what occurs to me here is this whole piece of this conversation, some of the others we have, is really symptomatic of the fact that we continue to look at this in a world that no longer exists.
It's true.
E-commerce is the ultimate retail leakage. It's not leakage. That's the mistake in here. The world has changed. And so when we continually go back to the strategies that are through this plan right now, just aren't relevant anymore. you're not going to build more office space because we already have more office space than we need. And everybody out there is trying to convert it to something else. You're not going to build more bricks and mortar because we already have more bricks and mortar than anybody can conceive we'd ever need. So the question is, what is the vision for the city? What does that look like, taking all that into account? And then what is it that we need? I mean, that may bring us back to, we need flexible workspaces. We're going to have a denser population and a smaller, they're not going to be, we're not, larger percentage of our folks are not going to be living in single family. They're going to want more space of some part where they can do things. What's that? What does that look like? Office space. It's not going to be office space. It's going to be a room in a house. So what are the services that they're going to be looking for that we would want to build into our plan to provide for time? It's not going to be a multi-use apartment retail complex. It's going to be something else.
Commissioner Wyckoff.
Yeah, so we could throw out the concept of AOUs instead of ADUs. Build yourself an office shed, turn the she shed into an office shed on the corner of the property. No, one of my concerns we had when we were talking about the TOD is making sure, and this addresses it, the lack of available services currently in Kenmore to serve if we have that occupancy that comes with the density in the TOD that we're planning for. And the parking issue of 0.5 spots per unit or whatever it was, which clearly not a whole car per household.
It's one golf cart.
One golf cart per household. So this, I like that. This, something that dawned on me, and this actually helps probably with the sales tax issue. Make sure that we have those Amazon receiving locker things in these buildings so that the services, the retail can come to them. They aren't expected to have a car to go get it. So make sure the retail can come easily and securely to them. And I believe that's where you put in your zip code as to where that item is being shipped to, and that captures your sales tax.
That's my.
We brought the sales to Kenmore.
My daughter has one of those home businesses in Kenmore, and she's an artist and sells art, like oils and stuff like that. You've seen it.
Amazing, amazing artist, by the way. It's Commissioner Kadri. Go on, yeah, sorry.
There you go. And so when we do the quarterly tax, she has to identify where it went and where they picked it up. So if they come to the house and they pick it up there, then it's delivered in Kenmore. If she takes it to Seattle and gives it to an art shop, then that's the delivery part and that's where the tax goes. Or if it goes out of state, then that's a whole nother ballgame altogether. But that was one of my reasons why I was asking about if we were having sales tax leakage. It's kind of like, other kinds of leakage. But the B&O thing, that may be a part of our ability to sustain and provide services and some economic development funding. We don't have to have a whole lot. I mean, God forbid I'd want to stir up the element out there and get the people yelling at the council again. I don't think anyone would want us to do that, but go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, I remember council that was offered as a mechanism to council for how to partially fund the climate action plan, and they turned it down.
For B&O.
Yeah, so it's going to have to be a policy discussion that we have in our community.
Well, it's with all due respect, it's a silly season. It's a election period right now. So.
Oh, silly season, yes.
And often politicians, we're one step removed so we can talk about these things. Although maybe we won't be one step removed after
Back away from
the
the
first of the
microphone.
year, some of us at least. But I think once they get into the new year and they have a full year and a half cycle before the silly season comes back, sometimes that first year is a time for some clearer thought and a little more, yeah, they're willing to take a little bit more risk. I mean, I'm just saying, you look at our Congress, I mean, they do the same thing. If it's the election year, they're very careful what they do.
That's why I asked. That's why I asked if we could tell whether there's been any historic relationship between our lack of a BO tax and economic development. Like, is it stimulating the kind of development that we want?
And I think Deb must know everything because she's been here 25 years. I just could not help
Nice segue.
myself.
So I actually have one more comment of substance that I don't think we brought up, and then I'll try to stop talking. But this came up for me around page 4F17, where I was doing, it talks about growth of green businesses in Kenmore. And that prompted me to think that, reflect on, there seems to be some appetite for green businesses and jobs on council. So I've heard council talk about wanting to be a kind of a hub for green jobs. And so it may be responsive to include that idea more strongly in this element. I know it is in here a little bit, but that would set the table for council to move on something that I'm hearing it's important to them.
We can also take a look at how that's addressed in the climate action plan as well.
Oh, I think it is. Yeah. Yeah, those things are in there.
Well, one thing that I did, there is a policy that has been added because of the guidance or the recommendations by PSRC on green businesses and focusing on sustainability, that kind of focus. And so I talked with Nina, who you all met, and seeing if there was a policy relatable to that. And sure enough, there is. And so you'll see something related to this. This paragraph here was kind of a leftover of the previous, I don't know why that just popped up. From the previous iteration, but I know in the policy section that was addressed. So there's kind of a talking between the two. But if we need to fix this specific section on that, we can look.
I think if you look at page 4F-24, which is objective ED-7, that's where there's sort of reflected about green jobs.
That's the one. And then these policies, that's what was added. Yep.
Can we do a climate action city incubator for the rest of the state of Washington here, since we're ahead of the curve? Can invite, and just have those, just like they do in Jackson Hole. They have the Fed there once a year. I know they make money there at Jackson Hole with that deal. That's
Well, Dwight, to your point, I think that Kenmore is uniquely positioned to be a leader in environment and climate work. I think we already are, and in DEIA work. And I think it's in part because we are a relatively small community. We can move more nimbly than some of our larger neighboring cities. And we have a lot of people who care about those things here. So I see that as an opportunity for us, for sure. I was surprised that our industrial waterfront wasn't listed as a this. I feel like that is a challenge for Kenmore.
Talking about the cement plant.
Yeah, the asphalt plant, the cement plant.
Why not include that?
It's not as a weakness, but
Okay.
it's sort of kind of sideways, I guess, mentioned as an opportunity with Lake Point. Although that property is not Lake Point, it's Glacier Northwest, but
So would you like to see something in that section that just talks about the expanse of industrial lands on the lakefront have I don't know how to phrase this the right way off the top of my head, but
yeah,
like it poses a challenge, maybe environmentally speaking too, obviously,
Mhm.
because they've been there for a long time. And
Yeah.
so redevelopment of those properties may be harder than your typical,
I think it is harder than your
yeah,
typical
so maybe something
property.
along
Yeah.
that.
It's too bad that weakness is part of that acronym, because I really want to call
Yeah.
that section challenges.
Right.
But I really do think that
Well, I mean, I've seen that. So that's great that you bring that up, because I've had that very same comment in another comp plan that I did prior, or another, it may not have been the comp plan, but a plan that had SWAT, but it was SC.
Scott.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that could be, if you wanted to rename it as challenges rather than the typical weaknesses. So,
I feel like challenges is more activating. Weaknesses just as sort of
so I don't know what you collectively think about that.
I recall the last time we went through this, we actually had the folks from Plywood Supply in here. We had folks in from Glacier and others. And uniformly, what we heard from all of them was, we're not going anywhere. We've got viable businesses here that have been well established for years. We employ people, we pay taxes.
And we have a good location.
We have a good location that can't be replaced.
I think that is fine. And at the same time, it can also be a challenge to our community that they are located where they are.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not disputing that.
Yeah.
Their decision that they make to do business here has an impact on an alternative use for those properties that the city may prefer, but can't take action on. And what's always been in the back of my mind, at what point do we recognize that? Is Lake Point ever really going to happen? Come on, is Glacier going to close down because we would like to have something prettier there? No. So what time do we get realistic and say, okay, let's accept this in our plan and plan behind it, or at least, put a shroud over it and say, we're just not going to fool ourselves into thinking that something different is going to happen down there in any short period of time or reasonable medium term of time. And so we need to look at our plans, assuming that that's not going to be an option. And what do we need to do?
I mean, that's to your point, it's economics that makes that decision. So getting back to the retail, scenario, right? It took 30+ years of evolution of changing from big box or going from even before that, the downtown to the suburb to now to online. And think of that timeline, or even before that of, when people were mining and then mines closed. So it's probably, if you think of it that way, but I think to Tracy's point, or Commissioner Banaszewski's point, is that while that is also a challenge, we also, recognize that it may take a long time for this to ever happen. But my question to you is, do we want to, not only change, maybe possibly change that section from weakness to challenges, but is there a benefit or not to add that statement in there about these businesses? Because you don't want to call them out as being, bad businesses.
Oh, yeah, it can be that could be difficult.
I guess that's the tightrope.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't think we want to characterize, these are valuable. Other cities would love to have these.
Especially where you use B&O.
Yeah.
Commissioner Wyckoff.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. I personally do like the Scott better than SWAT. Just because I don't like weakness. I'm all for the Scott. But also, I do think it's important to recognize, and I think it would be healthier and helpful, more positive for us to consider Kenmore is here and was established originally back when they put in the first water tower to drive industry. And the industry is what drove the occupancy. And that the two have always coincided, at least according to what's in the Kenmore history book, that this has always been a blue collar town with a weekend getaway by the lake. Camaraderie, it's the two that go together that has always made Kenmore a very unique community. You had the well-to-do that could take the car out here on the weekend, and then you had the guys running the shake mill all week long, and that's always been Kenmore. So I think really, yeah, recognize that, definitely not chastise for that, because that drives the economy that got us where we are. I don't think we can put one of those Vegas spheres over it with a brilliant light show, but we tried the tarps with the herons on them, those blew away eventually, but just, yeah, I don't think we want to. I would feel really good if we could just deal with the fact that, yeah, I've lived in the area since 94, 95. And I've heard about the promise of Lake Point being developed into this glamorous, beautiful resort since then. And I certainly wouldn't bank on it anytime soon. So yeah, I think it'd be healthier to just list it as a challenge and work forward and work around and do what we can do and not try to put all of our eggs in that basket that's going to someday save the bank. I would rather see us be more proactive with what we have to work with and do that. My 2 cents.
Well, along those lines, well, this whole Lake Point thing, everyone, it's like the rough diamond, they throw it around and use it as, well, now we're going to make it into a park and we're going to do a bond, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. And it has been going on since 95. And even it had an effect on other development up at the top of the lake. I know Lake Forest Park, and talking about the development at the mall down there. Everyone was expecting Kenmore to have Lake Point developed, and it just never. But on a couple different items. So has anyone talked to Air Harbor about if they need more space? I'm just kind of curious. I don't mean to be calling out businesses, but I'm talking about space because they're pretty full on their planes down there now. And they need to be down by the water.
That would sort of be I mean, Stephanie Lukash, the deputy city manager, I think meets frequently with many of the businesses. And so I don't know if she's had any conversations about their future plans for expansion or staying in Kenmore or whatever.
Well, I think
don't
they're
really
gonna
know.
stay in there, Kenmore here. I mean, they can't leave.
Well, no, I know. I came out wrong, but
Don't
mean,
say that.
no, I'm just saying,
No,
that,
no,
I mean, they're
I'm
about, they're a
talking to
valid,
her,
they're a
not to
valid
you.
business, and so I don't know if that has come up in conversation or not.
On another topic, if some folks don't know this, but a lot of the shoreline starting, say, around Log Boom and going all the way around the lake, it's from silt dredged out of the river over here it's at the edge, and it was filled in, and that's how particularly the waterfront Lake Forest Park was built. And only now are we starting to see the rock Ephesus starting to fall down. And of course, they can't build them back up, which is a good thing for the fish. But Kenmore has contributed greatly to the north end of the lake and its property values. So, I think
This is Commissioner Connery. Just
oh, there he is.
one last comment for me. I certainly appreciate the hard work the effort that's gone into this draft. I just want to reiterate Commissioner Van Allen's comment earlier. I don't want to rely upon a 2018 analysis of how the economy was 5 years ago pre-COVID. I think we need to, in the intro or perhaps the first few pages, something to the effect that this is with the understanding the economic trends are ever changing. I mean, we need to kind of make that clear in this document that, you know, the economy has changed and is going to continue to change over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So I think we need to kind of not use that 2018 consulting analysis as a guide, but just kind of, you know, use that as understanding that times have changed. And so we need to, I do think that we need to indicate that in this document. And I'll work on maybe the language that we could possibly use, but that's something that we should kind of keep in mind as we go through this.
I guess a question for the commission as a whole, do you find any value in mentioning that old data, or at least, I guess not mentioning it, but say for instance, this page here specifically, these pastes that I did, if I was to eliminate those, I don't think we're losing anything because they are somewhat dated at this point, but at least recognizing that, okay, we did do this plan. The last economic development strategy or analysis that the city did was 2018. And as Commissioner Quadri said, that you know, economic trends do change. Our economy has changed, and this data that is provided in this element is the most up to date that we have available at this time, with the understanding that, you know, this is a work in progress or something to that nature. But do you all agree that possibly that this page in specific for F21 may go away, and or any further detailed on that 2018 study? And I just keep it brief.
Go ahead.
My belief is that those are obsolete
Okay.
and they're misleading. The follow-up is, but something has to go there that serves the same function.
Sure.
And I'm unclear on what that is. Maybe that's our work. Maybe that's the work of a city council. Maybe it's the work of Who knows?
We probably have to do the draft. One of the feedbacks we've gotten from the councils, they have liked the staff in ours comprehensive work, so they're just stuck doing the big policy issues. They don't have to worry about the weeds much. So I think that that's what we might have to.
I think that's a good answer, and this is where 40 years of administrative experience comes in. I think we need some help in understanding what the options could be. And I think probably that's something we would ask staff to do. I'm sure other cities are out there trying to deal with the same issue. I don't know if there's anything that's been published on this, but it would be nice to not have to invent this out of whole cloth,
Well,
to have the benefit of other people's thinking.
MSRC, we could do a search there just to see if a city has deposited one of their papers there. I mean, that's a thought. Todd, you're giving me that look. I know, but it's just a thought, looking not easy.
Someone is trying to give us a message here. We've gone too far.
Go ahead, Commissioner Benciski.
I'm wondering if there were any reflections as the business incubator closed down, any reflections on lessons learned from that period that might be helpful for us in crafting some statements for this element.
I mean, I think even if you look at that 2018 data, a lot of it still seems to ring true.
Debbie, are you looking at the tables that we were just talking about?
I am looking at
Yeah.
the tables. I think, if you look at the opportunities and challenges, for example, I think a lot of them still sort of ring true. I think the question then is what else, should be updated? And I think, we should probably say something about, the pandemic may have, furthered the e-commerce business, for example. There may now be more people sort of working from home. So these are kind of trends that are known, that we can kind of say, here's what was in 2018, and some of these things may still ring true, and here's what we know about trends in general, which is, general data that we can kind of glean from sources. And then maybe say something like, this might be something that over the next couple of years might be worth sort of refreshing to get more local data. But whether we do it now or not, I guess is the question.
Well, one thing, it's very possible that we might want to, if we make major changes and all that to those two exhibits, maybe we put the original exhibits in an appendix as a reference to where we were in 2018, and then just redo we probably will have to redo a bunch of this, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm looking at it again. I see Debbie's point. A lot of it does still seem relevant. So maybe it's a matter of making a note about why this is from 2018, and then reflecting on, like Debbie said, that much of these are still relevant. And I really liked how you explained the city's pivot toward those three, I don't know what you called them, category 3 prongs of being business friendly. I really liked that. Maybe we can make that connection more clear for the reader of this element. I don't know who that's going to be, but yeah. And then I really am curious about any lessons learned from the business incubator being closed down, because I feel like that came from an era when economic development, like you said, was in the top 5 and had more resources poured in. So I'd love to just learn from that and apply that learning going forward.
So on page 4F3, which I have on the screen, I briefly mentioned this 2018 plan. And then I say, going on to the new economic development approach, using the 2018 strategy as a guide,
Yeah.
the city developed a three-pronged approach that is guiding Kenmore's economic development work. These include 1, 2, 3, these three prongs. And so that was an attempt to bridge the two together, but getting back to the exhibits, we could either do what some of you suggested, which is just noting these as an appendix, or still keep them, but just note that these are still relevant, but they're things to look back at the time, but also looking forward, or something to that nature. I don't know.
Well, I think some of these are clearly just not good statements for the current period. I look at the retail opportunities, current retail leakage in other retail centers. That's just wrong in the current context. Some of these we may be able to recap that I think still could be continued, but maybe what we have is maybe a medium versus a long-term opportunity, because some of these will come back. Eventually, vacancy rates will go down as the population increases, and you'll see a return to more normal times. But over the next 5 years, probably not. Would we make a change now in coding or in our regulations or our land use based upon these opportunities right now? I think that would be a mistake. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, yeah, that would make sense. But I think we have to recognize the fact that there has been a watershed change here. And so what would have been a prudent and accepted practice or strategy in the past doesn't make sense, at least in the medium term. But things change in the long term.
Can you say, Mike, why you feel like current retail leakage to the retail centers doesn't apply anymore?
Because they're not leaking to other retail centers.
They're
They're
leaking
being
to
captured
Amazon.
by e-commerce. So it's not going from mortar and bricks to mortar and bricks somewhere else.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm not typical. I actually make a point to shop at Safeway in Kenmore, even though it's not my favorite grocery store, because it's in Kenmore.
No.
Well, I'm saying because it's in Kenmore, but there are sometimes, like when I want to buy a book, I can't buy a book in Kenmore, so I go to Lake Forest Park. And my mom, she likes to shop at Target, so she goes to Northgate. So I guess in my family, I'm seeing that we do have to travel outside Kenmore for some of our retail needs. Of course, I do order a lot of things on Amazon too, so I definitely see your point. But this still, from my experience at least, seems broadly still relevant to me.
Yeah, that's just Mr. Condry. My family's the opposite. We haven't left the house to get groceries in a while. So, I mean, it's, I mean, I think I agree with Mr. Panelin. I maybe,
Instacart.
yeah, Instacart, Grubhub, Uber Eats. It's something that I've been doing since COVID. And I think perhaps have a caveat or a footnote in the introduction section saying that, times have changed, the economy has changed, and not all of this may apply at this point. Maybe something like that could fix this issue, but yeah.
I should not think that my household is representative of any other household in Kenmore. I will not make that mistake again.
Oh, my goodness. I also think that the workforce housing thing, we really got to work on that. Because I think your point that if we have a lot of service industry here, we have very little housing that they can afford.
Zero.
Yeah, zero, that's true. So and it's not missing middle, it's just affordable housing. And then even when they build the affordable housing, you're looking at seniors and other groups that are gonna jump on that. And you're still not gonna have workforce housing. Anyway, you had your hand up.
Yeah, to Tracy's point, I had to go by toner the other day and there is nowhere high or low. Although now that I'm reflecting on this sales tax issue, on if I'd had it delivered, the sales tax would have been captured for Kenmore. I drove clear out past Mill Creek to the Staples that had it on the shelf. And granted, I did need it because I had 100 pages to print, but maybe the slogan for Kenmore is if you're going to leave town, stay home.
That's true.
I also, we're not going to solve this issue tonight or
At all.
on Kenmore's Planning Commission, probably not.
Don't tell the public that. We'll get
Probably
yelled
not
at.
even at the level of city council, but I do, it's a larger issue about the direction our culture and society is moving. Like, do we want people to be ordering things online? We don't think about what the effect that practice has on the environment. Warehouses they're Amazon and other companies are building these enormous warehouses over wetlands. People have horrible working conditions in these warehouses. Like, it's not, I just, since we've talked about it so much, I feel compelled to bring up that side of it. Just for, I don't know, so that we're considering the whole. And that's actually part of the reason that I will drive to Lake Forest Park to get a book, so that I don't have to order it on Amazon. I can go to Third Place Books, a small local business. You know, that does influence the decisions that I make for how I buy things. And yet still I order a lot of things on Amazon.
I still think we're a prime planning commission.
You think we're gonna
Sure.
solve it?
We're gonna, yeah, we can be delivered in 2 days. Whatever.
Oh, we're a
Deb
prime,
wants.
I did not understand that, Dwight.
Okay. Well, now, Todd, is there anything more you want to squeeze out of us tonight?
Well, my question, obviously, we're not quite through this. This is first to read, so I'd like to get your feedback on it. Debbie and I have received a number of your comments, and we'll take note and adjust as needed and bring back some of those changes. But I would maybe consider at the next meeting. It looks like we spent the bulk of our meeting on the, you know, if you will, the meat of the element, not necessarily the goals and policies. So maybe we'll bring back these edits or other changes to the substantial part narrative of the element, and then share those with you. And then maybe we dive into the goals and policies part
Page
a little
by
bit
page,
more.
yeah.
So if there was any comments based on tonight's feedback that we received from you that can be adjusted in the goals and policy, we'll certainly do that. But from what I heard, is most of it is in the narrative, and we'll share that, and then we can maybe go line by line. I will make those line numbers, so that's a little easier. So, my understanding is that we'll kind of do the twofold. We'll just bring back these additional changes, see what you think about those, and then go into the next section, goals and policies.
Well, plus some of these issues that we brought up tonight, you're probably, when we start going through page by page, you're gonna stop us and say, now, if you remember, we discussed this area. Now, is that what you really want? And that works well with us too.
Yep.
And I think your idea would be so that the next time we start this, we'll start page by page.
Yeah.
Again, we'll love it. Yes. Let's see. I was going to say one other thing. Now I forgot what I was. off the. I got this.
Well, I guess the questions that we had for you is on the next meeting. So we did understand that the next meeting date is actually election night.
Yeah,
And
we're
I
not
understand that that was going to be
We're gonna
can-
cancel that tonight.
right? So the next meeting would then be the week of Thanksgiving. So is that something that you would want to still do or just
Now,
continue?
the council is meeting on Monday of that week.
I see a nod from our city clerk, so yes.
Is there interest in? Look at my schedule here. It's on there. So that would have been the 21st. How about 14th? If those of you have schedules, is the 14th possible for our staff?
We'd have to check on room availability because it's not a regularly scheduled meeting, and we'd have to sort of advertise that in advance as well, either to cancel and re-advertise a different date.
At this point, I have a board meeting scheduled for my paid job.
Okay, so how about, where are we on the 28th? Now, that means we would do 2 weeks in a row, 28th and the 5th.
I could say for this element, I don't know if I'd have a turnaround that fast. I mean, we could certainly do a meeting, but I don't know if we did this element at the 28th and then the turnaround and get you an editable cop or the revisions
Oh, I
based on
don't-
our conversation at the next meeting.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's going, we're not gonna get through the whole element in one
No,
meeting, so that might help your workload, that you don't have to worry about turning something over, but at the end of the second meeting, you'll have a whole element from us as far as a working, we'll be close to. Now, don't laugh over there, Deb.
I'm not, I'm just, so I guess what we're figuring out, you know for sure that you'd have to make a decision tonight on canceling the 7th because there is a conflict in terms of having the voting.
Yeah, we're gonna do
But I
that.
think
in a
that
second.
the question then is we would need at least one more meeting to kind of get through your overall review of the element before we schedule a public hearing. So the question is whether you want to do that on the 21st or on December 5th. Rather than trying to, if those two dates don't work, then I think look at alternatives.
Okay, so 21st is 2 days before Thanksgiving. How's the council? That's good over on the left.
The 21st of November,
And that's my left. It's not the left.
that would work.
I will be in town and available to meet.
You can, okay, so we're gonna go ahead and let me look at my thing. I'm already got this scheduled, so we're good. We got 4. And how
works for
about the voice? Is the voice still there?
voice.
Yeah, that works for me as well. I'll be.
Okay, the voice will be here.
So just confirming the 21st, our regularly scheduled date is. the
Is
next-
we're
okay,
on, if that's good for you
That's
guys.
works.
Okay, and then that
But we'll go
clears
through
up the deal.
the
Okay.
next iteration of the plan and then we'll, at the December 5th meeting, we'll consider on scheduling a hearing. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's, well,
Or it's up-
hearing a hearing. I think the 21st, it's going to depend on how much you get through.
Right.
Whether we are able to kind of feel comfortable or confident that you have a draft that you think is ready for public hearing.
Yeah.
If you do, there is time to schedule a public hearing on December 5th. Or if we don't get through it, you can decide that you don't want to meet at all in December, and then we'll start in January with finalizing the draft and holding a public hearing in January.
And anyway, you would probably not recommend doing a public hearing on the 19th.
No.
That's not a
No,
good
no, I
thing.
think that
Okay.
the
would
latest,
not do that.
no, I think we are assuming that you would cancel December 19th. The question then is if we got through things on the 21st, you could consider an option of holding a hearing on the 5th, or you could just wait till January.
And our next is the next element coming up on our docket is the,
Well, our hope was the downtown element, but we still have some conversations and trying to, because that's the most relatable to the economic development. Those two kind of, I've said this before and talking to each other and all these other elements, but these two in specific, because we do mention downtown planning, economic development. So we figured naturally that makes the most sense to queue up next in the list of elements. And then after that, we would get into natural environment or community design, natural environment. And then of course, need to go back to middle housing, fixing up the housing element and land use based on changes of. So yeah, we've still got a number of elements to get through in 2024, but our hope is, and this is no rush on this element, but our hope is to,
well, we
Early
have
to get-
several to get done.
yeah,
So
at our hope is either, getting a hearing in December. If not, it would be early January, and then we would move on.
So in early January, if you had everything going right, our next one would be the downtown.
Correct.
Okay, that
That
would
sounds
start
right.
in January. Then,
Yeah,
okay.
correct.
Well, it's just good for, to understand your thoughts and processes and where we're going to be going. So is there any questions from the commission on that? Yeah, I will entertain a motion to cancel our November 7th meeting.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
Excuse me, Chair, who made the motion?
You made the motion.
No, you made, I'm,
Seconded.
well, I'm going to second.
Oh.
Commissioner Vanderland.
Vanderland, okay.
Whether he knows it or not, Vanderland made the motion and I seconded it. The
Thank
chair
you.
seconds it.
And did we have a vote?
Well, we're going to.
Okay.
Did I hear the big voice there? No. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion's adopted. I'd entertain a motion to excuse Commissioner Lutzis.
So moved.
Been moved and second to excuse Commissioner Lutzis from tonight due to a commitment that came up that he was unable to get out of. So if there's no objections, the motion will stand approved. Okay, so for the good of, I just want to remind everybody that Monday, the council is going to review 14 applications for, I believe it's 14, to choose who gets to go to be grilled the following. So that's the 23rd, and then I understand the grilling will occur on the 13th because they don't meet the first Monday of the month, or they?
I believe it was the 6th.
That's currently what's scheduled. I don't know if that date will change. I'll know more on Monday.
Okay, so just so you all know what to put on your Monday calendars. Is there anything else for the good of the order? And nothing from the voice?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the meeting is adjourned. Good.
All right, have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, Sad.
divorce.